and welcome to the Oosterhout Free Virtual Library. It's Miss Melissa back with the third installment of the mystery chapter book we're reading, The Absent Author by Ron Roy, published by Random House. It comes from the Cloud Library, available free, thousands of books for all ages. Download it from the Oosterhout Facebook page or the Oosterhout website. When we last left our young detectives, Josh, Ruth Rose, and Dink, and the lady who had just introduced herself, they were wondering why Wallace hadn't shown up, and they saw a police officer coming down the street. So that sounds like it could be a big development. Let's find out as we rejoin the absent author. Look, the cops are coming! They must have heard about the kidnapping. A police officer was walking towards them. Josh, that's just Officer Fallon, Jimmy's grandfather, said Dink. Jimmy came to get a book signed. I saw him inside the book nook. Maybe we should show the officer these letters, Ruth Rose suggested. They could be clues if Wallace really had been kidnapped. Who's been kidnapped? The officer said, who was now standing near them. Not my grandson, I hope, he added, grinning. Dink showed Officer Fallon the two letters. We think Wallace might have been kidnapped, he said. He promised he'd be here to sign books, and he didn't show up. Officer read Mavis's letter first, then Dink. He scratched his chin and then handed the letters back. The letters do sound a bit suspicious, he said, but it's more likely that Mr. Wallace just missed his flight. Jimmy ran out of the book nook, waving a Wallace book at his grandfather. Grandpa, he never came. Can we go for ice cream anyway? Officer Fallon put a big hand on Jimmy's head. In a minute, son. To Dink, he said, I wouldn't worry. Mr. Wallace will show up. Call me tomorrow if there's no news, okay? They watched Jimmy and his grandfather walk away. Dink handed Mavis's letter back to her. He folded his and slid it into his pocket. Crazy thoughts were bouncing around his head. What if Wallace really had been kidnapped? It happened because I invited him to Greenlawn. I'm practically an accomplice. I don't want to wait until tomorrow, he said finally. I say we start looking for Wallace now. Where do we start? Ruth Rose asked. Dink jerked his thumb over his shoulder. Right here at the book nook. Excuse me, Mavis Green said shyly. May I come too? Sure. He marched back inside the book nook, the others following. Mr. Paskey was putting books back on the shelf. He looked even more nervous than before. Excuse me, Mr. Paskey, Dink said. Have you heard from Wallace? Mr. Paskey's hand shot up to his bow tie. No, Dink, not a word. We think he was kidnapped, Josh said. Mr. Paskey swallowed, making his bow tie wiggle. Now, Joshua, let's not jump to conclusions. I'm sure there's a rational explanation for his absence. Dink told Mr. Paskey about the two letters. I'm really worried, Mr. Paskey. Where could he be? Mr. Paskey took out a handkerchief and wiped his face. I have no idea. He took a letter from his desk and handed it to Dink. All I have is his itinerary. Itinerary for Wallace. 1. Arrive at Bradley Airport at 7 p.m. Friday, July 15th. New England Airlines Flight 3132. 2. Meet driver from Lawrence Taxi Service. 3. Drive to Shangri-La Hotel. 4. Sign books at Book Nook at 11 a.m. Saturday, July 16th. 5. Lunch, then back to the airport for 4:30 flight. Can I keep this? Dink asked Mr. Paskey. Mr. Paskey blinked. Well, I guess I'd be all right, but why do you need the itinerary? Dink picked up a marker and drew circles around the words airport, taxi, hotel, and book nook. This looks like a trail. It leads from the airport last night to the Book Nook today, Dink said. And somewhere along this trail, Wallace disappeared. Dink stared at the itinerary. And we're going to find him. Mr. Paskey shooed them out of the Book Nook and locked the front door. I have to eat lunch, he said. He scurried down Main Street. Come on, Dink said. There's a phone in Ellie's diner. Good, we can eat while you're calling. Josh stopped. Who are you calling? The airport, Dink said, to see if Wallace was on that 7 o'clock flight last night. They walked into Ellie's diner just as Jimmy and his grandfather came out. Jimmy was working on a triple-decker chocolate cone. Ellie stood behind the counter. As usual, her apron was smeared with ketchup, mustard, chocolate, and a lot of stuff Dink didn't recognize. Ellie smiled. Hiya, Dink. Butter crunch, right? Dink shook his head. No, Ellie, I came to use the phone. Excuse me, said Mavis Green, but would it be all right if I bought you each a cone? I was going to buy lunch for Mr. Wallace anyway. Gee, thanks, Josh said. I'll have a scoop of mint chip and a scoop of pistachio. Oh, you like green ice cream too, Mavis said. She smiled shyly. I'll have the same, please. I like pink ice cream, Ruth Rose said. I'll have a strawberry cone, please. 1 scoop. How about you, Dink? Mavis asked. I'm not hungry, thanks, he said. But you guys go ahead. I'm going to call the airport. Dink felt guilty. If he had invited Wallace to Greenlawn, his favorite author would be home safe at home in his castle in Maine. But Dink couldn't help feeling excited too. He felt like a detective in one of Wallace's books. Dink stepped into the phone booth. Phone booth is how people used to make phone calls in the olden days. Looked up the number for New England Airlines and called. When a voice came on, he asked if Wallace had been aboard Flight 3132 last night. He was? Did it land at 7 o'clock? Dink asked. Thanks a lot. He rushed out of the phone booth. Hey guys, they told me Wallace was on the plane and it landed just on time. So he didn't miss his flight, Ruth Rose said through strawberry pink lips. That's right. Dink pulled out the itinerary. He drew a line through the word airport. This is so exciting, Ruth Rose said. Now what? Josh asked. Dink pointed to the next circle on the itinerary. Now we need to find out if a taxi picked him up, he said. Lawrence Taxi is over by the river, Ruth Rose said. Dink looked at Mavis. Would you like to come with us? We can walk there in 5 minutes. Mavis Green wiped her lips carefully with a napkin. I'd love to come, she said in her soft voice. They left Ellie's diner, walking left on Bridge Lane, then headed down Woodview Road towards the river. Mr. Paskey looked pretty upset, didn't he? Josh said, crunching the last of his cone. His chin was green. Wouldn't you be upset if you had a bunch of customers at your store waiting to meet a famous author and he didn't show up? Ruth Rose asked. Yeah, but he was sweating buckets, Josh said. I wonder if Mr. Paskey kidnapped Wallace. Josh, get real, said Ruth Rose. Why would Mr. Paskey kidnap an author? He sells tons of Wallace's books. I don't think Mr. Paskey's the kidnapper, Dink said. But in a way, Josh is right. Detectives should consider everyone a suspect, just the way they do in Wallace's books. At River Road, they turned left. 2 minutes later, Dink pushed open the door to Lawrence Taxi Service. He asked the man behind the counter if one of their drivers had met Flight 3132 at Bradley Airport the previous night. The man ran his finger down a list on a clipboard. That would be Maureen Higgins. She's out back eating her lunch, he said, pointing over his shoulder. Walk straight back. Cutting through the building to a grassy area and back, they looked through the trees and could see the river. The sun reflected off the water like bright coins. A woman was sitting at a picnic bench, eating a sandwich and filling in a crossword puzzle. Excuse me, are you Maureen Higgins? Dink asked. The woman shook her head without looking up. No, I'm Marilyn Monroe. The woman wrote in another letter. Then she looked up. She had the merriest blue eyes Dink had ever seen. Yeah, cutie pie, I'm Maureen. She pointed her sandwich at Dink. And who might you be? I'm Dink Duncan, he said. And these are my friends, Josh, Ruth Rose, and Mavis. We wondered if you could help us, Ruth Rose said. Maureen stared at them. How? Did you pick up a man named Wallace at the airport last night? Dink asked. Maureen squinted one of her blue eyes. Why do you want to know? Because he's missing, said Josh. Well, I sure ain't got him. Maureen took a bite of her sandwich. Mayonnaise oozed through her fingers. I know, Dink said. I mean, we didn't think you had him, but did you pick him up? Maureen nodded, swallowing. Sure, I picked him up. 7 o'clock sharp. I was there with my sign saying Wallace. The guy spots me, trots over. I take him out to my taxi. He climbs in, carrying a small suitcase. Kind of spooky guy. Dressed in a hat, long raincoat, sunglasses. Sunglasses at night. Doesn't speak a word, just sits, spooky. Did you take him to the Shangri-La Hotel, Dink asked. Yep, said Maureen. Those were my orders. Guy didn't have to give directions, but it would have been nice if he had said something. Pass the time, you know. Lot of people, they chat just to act friendly. Not this one. Quiet as a mouse in the back seat. Maureen wiped mayonnaise from her fingers and lips. Who's this Wallace guy anyway? He's a famous writer, Ruth Rose said. Maureen's mouth fell open. You mean I had a celebrity in my cab and never even knew it? What happened when you got to the hotel? Josh asked. Maureen stood up and tossed her napkin in the trash. I get out of my side, then I open his door. He hops out, hands me a 20. Last I've seen, he's scooting into the lobby. Dink pulled out the itinerary. He crossed out taxi with a thick black line. Then he drew a question mark next to hotel. Thanks a lot, Miss Higgins, he said. Come on, guys. I have a feeling we're getting closer to finding Wallace. Maureen put her hand on Dink's arm. I just thought of something, she said. When he handed me my fare, this Wallace fella was smiling. Dink stared at Maureen. Smiling? She nodded. Yep, had a silly grin on his face, like he knew a big secret or something. Back on Main Street, Josh adjusted his backpack and led the way to the Shangri-La Hotel. Like he knew a big secret or something. What is this big secret? We'll find out next time on Book Bites from the Oosterhout Free Virtual Library.